and Audacity in 3, 2, 1.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we have a super special guest with us. So as you guys know, we went to the IFCA event in Phoenix, Arizona last month, and we had the pleasure of listening to an amazing presentation. And Marissa and I are like, we need to have this girl on our podcast. So we have with us today, Dr. Orvidas. Did I say that correctly?
Orvidas, close enough.
Orvidas, yeah. Okay. So Kasey Jo, as you might know her on Instagram, and we kind of want to know, I guess your specialty is in growth mindset and habit change. So if you could give us an introduction and how you kind of got into that field, our audience would love to know.
Yeah, definitely. I think how far back do we want to go here? But I think I honestly started like a lot of women. I was in college and realizing that I needed to start working out in some capacity, because prior to that, it was all volleyball all of the time and like 3-hour practices and whatever, and that took care of itself. But now it's like, okay, now I'm in charge of my own fitness. What do I do here? And fell into the cardio bunny trap for a long time, was doing like 2-a-days. It was a situation where it would be like 6 miles of running in the morning, and then I'd go to the gym in the evening to do strength training, quote unquote. But it was just like circuits via like this Nike training app on my phone. And like, that was what I was doing. And I was exhausted. I was under eating, but also under eating in order to save room for binge drinking on the weekends. And it was a hot mess, but I'm sure many people are probably listening to it like, that sounds like my story. But as you're like, yep, raise my hand. But as I got into it more and more, I was getting frustrated too, because I wasn't seeing like the progress that I was looking for. I wasn't feeling good. I was super fatigued all the time. Couldn't figure out what I need to do. And it's like, you always just want to do more and eat less, but that's really, as we know now, not the answer to the problem. So I spent a lot of time on bodybuilding.com forums and like doing a little bit more of my own like research to some degree, listening to podcasts, YouTube, all of that stuff, and was coming to realize that strength training really was the answer, and not strength training the way that I was doing it, but following more of like a progressive overload based program, and that you need to be eating enough protein. I was starting to understand macros a little bit more, and just like really got into it very fast. I think this happened to me a lot, where it's like, if there's an area that I don't know anything about and it's something that could help me, it's like, it's 2 seconds and I'm like totally in depth in it, want to be all about it. So that's what happened. And I got really into it. And as I started following more structured strength training programs, eating better, sleeping more, not binge drinking all the time, I was noticing how it was showing up in all other aspects of my life too, positively, whether it was from a just general like energy perspective or determination or confidence, focus, things like that. And really started to wonder, why are more women not doing this? Why am it's like I found this like super special thing. Why are more people not doing it? Why do we still have an obesity epidemic on our hands when you can like feel this good, look this good, like all of this stuff, and get so many benefits out of it? So I was a psychology student at the time. So I was really starting to think from a psychological perspective. I'm still a student of psychology, I guess. But so I was thinking about it from that perspective, and behavior change and all of these things, like there has to be something else to this problem. It's not that people don't know that they should be doing it. Like everyone knows they need to exercise and eat healthy, but people still aren't doing it. So what's going on here? So I went to grad school in an attempt to sort of answer this question, at least to a degree. I came across the Mindset Lab at North Carolina State University, and at this time had no idea that growth versus fixed mindset was like a science, and that there was actually like evidence-based practices behind it, nothing. But my advisor, who was doing work in the Mindset Lab, was doing work specifically on obesity and messaging around obesity, and how the way we present things or talk about things or how we say things can make a difference, and how people actually show up in their lives and how they behave and what actions they do or do not take. So this was sort of like, ooh, this could, solve this question that I have. So I joined the Mindset Lab and fell in love with mindset science right off the bat, just seeing how powerful it was. Your perspectives, how you make sense of things, how you assign meaning to things can quite literally determine the trajectory of your life, including your health and fitness behaviors. So I kind of took a full force swing into the health and fitness side of mindset, whereas there wasn't, just a little bit of that obesity work was going on, but no other grad students were doing work in that area. So I kind of like steamed the way there, and spent my entire time during my PhD, which ended up being about 4.5 years, researching health and fitness behaviors from a mindset perspective. So how that kind of shows up is, unsurprisingly, having a growth mindset about your health and fitness can lead you to be more successful in those behaviors, in those goals, achieve the things from a health and fitness perspective that you want to. So yeah, that's what I was doing there. And in the meantime, during my PhD, I needed to make money and I really enjoyed health and fitness. So I started coaching as well. So I was a nutrition coach and still am to this day, and kind of started my own little side hustle business during my PhD, and it was really cool to do that while I was doing the research, because it was very much so like I would quite literally leave the lab and doing studies and then go and coach people one-on-one. So it was very cool to be able to like intertwine and see those things work at the same time, like in real time. And yeah, so today I still sort of have those two halves of my life showing up in my business. I own a one-on-one health and fitness coaching company. I have 5 assistant coaches on my team who have all been like mentored by me, trained by me from a mindset and behavior change perspective. And then the other half is coaching other coaches, where I walk them through my certification that is all about these things: mindset, behavior change, psychology, to use these evidence-based practices in their own coaching careers with their own clients.
I love it. That's awesome. Kasey, one of my favorite things about you is just how well you deliver messages, whether that's like telling your story, bringing it full circle, or like just your Instagram content and posts. Like I will always like scroll by and there'll be something that maybe I've been thinking about making a post about, and I'll be like, oh, this was explained really, really well. Crap, I can't just like take that and like use it. But no, it's really like something that I admire a lot about you. And it's cool to see that there's actually a lot of parallels between like my history with health and fitness and yours. Fellow volleyball player here. I'm just curious, for all the people who play volleyball who are listening to this, what position did you play?
I was a middle hitter.
Oh, wow. I realized you were actually taller than I thought you were when I saw you at the event. I'm a libero, so fellow short people out there, but yeah, just like the whole history of things. And personally, I'm halfway through my master's right now, undecided on continuing, but kind of got into it for the same reasons of like, I was doing the coaching, doing the practical application, which is like what I absolutely love and am passionate about, is seeing all the things that we research and study actually come to life in the people that we work with. But also being able to see the back end side of that was really cool too, with the research and how that process goes and how it develops. And for me, being a master's student in exercise science specifically, I saw a lack in the amount of mindset stuff that comes into it. Because I think one of the biggest problems, like you said, is everybody knows what you should do, what's optimal. Like you do these studies to see, like, should you have pre-workout carbs? Is it necessary? And like, what does that do to your workout performance? And all of these little nuances and details that we kind of funnel into isolation, right? When we're doing a research study, we look at it in an isolated or as isolated as possible fashion. But then when you go and you work with someone in real life, or you're somebody who's trying to create behavior change in your life, you're like, this isn't working out the same way it did on paper because of the social and the emotional and the behavioral aspects that all just like mess with what actually happens. So I'm really excited to dive into all of this, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. That is like something very interesting. It's hard because in research, like you do need to make it more isolated, right? Because you don't want any other confounding variables that are messing with the two, like the relationship between variable A and variable B that you're looking at. So you want nothing else in there. But the reality is that the real world has a lot of things, a lot of other things that are impacting it. So it is difficult for sure. And that's where it is cool to see like, okay, so there's a relationship that we see in the research, in the lab and with like these survey studies or, the experimental studies that we do. Now let's go see, how it actually plays out in the real world with practice and see what happens then. So there really is like a multi-phase process. But to be honest, that's why I didn't want to stay in academia, is because I didn't want this work to just end up in a journal, which how many coaches are like diving into like social psychology journals, like learning about behavior change and like what is working for mindset interventions in the lab? Like nobody. So it felt a little bit like futile. Like I was doing all of this work and putting in all this effort, discovering these cool things and like relationships and understanding all of this stuff, but where's it actually going to go? So that's why I'm like very excited to be doing what I'm doing now, because I can still bring the research in and literally like serve it up to people in a more digestible format. Like here are the actual tips and strategies and tools and things that you can use in your coaching practices based on the research that we have. So yeah.
I think that as coaching has evolved, I mean, back in like 2014, 15, 16, when it was brand new and you're like, oh, you can coach online, then it was just kind of like, yeah, you can get your workouts and you can get your macros, and that was kind of it. But because I feel like there are so many coaches now, and maybe as coaches have been coaching for longer, they want to learn how they can be a better coach. And so I think the more experience you have, you're like, it's not just macros, it's not just training, like it's how the clients think, how they feel. And one of the things I really loved about your presentation, and I don't know if this just stuck out the most to me, and something that I implemented on my check-in form moving forward, was like, okay, how many days did you hit your macros, or whatever, 6 out of 7. And I might have a client, it's like, well, how do you feel? How do you feel about your adherence? And they're like, oh, 0 out of 10. Like, I feel awful. I blew this one day, and, and they're so hard on themselves, and they don't give themselves a break. And on paper, it's like, oh, they hit their macros. Like they're doing great. They're doing awesome, but they're having this like internal struggle. And then you have someone who's like, I don't know, 3 out of 7. Like, how do you feel? Great. And so I think it's just so interesting how, and this kind of brought up the first question that we had, is kind of like, the importance of mindset versus like the physical aspects of coaching. Like you can have someone who's doing all the things, they're hitting their macros 100%, they're doing their workouts and cardio, everything's 100%. But if their mindset isn't there, or something's off, then it almost doesn't even really matter that they're doing all those things. So I would love for you to maybe dive in a little bit more and share your experience with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about the perspective that people are taking, right? And so basic definition of mindset that we often use like in the literature and things like that is that it's the lens that you're taking to see the world through and assign meaning towards things and make sense of the world. So that was a very good example of how their mindset is playing a role in this, right? And then of course you can break it down further and talk about growth versus fixed mindset and how that might be showing up. And that could be different again, depending on the person, right? In both of those scenarios that you laid out, that those people may have a growth or fixed mindset, like based on once you dig in a little bit more. But without asking that question, you can't dig in more. You don't know, right? Instead, it's left up to the assumption of the coach. Like, oh, this person hit their macros 6 out of 7 days of the week. Like, that's amazing. You go on with your check-in, you tell them what they should do next, like make any adjustments, and you carry on. Meanwhile, this person's like, it's me, I can never do anything right. I'm never perfect, that sort of thing. Whereas someone else, how terrible would it be if you went to the person who hit their macros 3 out of 7 days and you were like, hey, we really got to step it up this week. I know you're probably feeling a little bit disappointed, but that's okay. Like, we'll figure it out. And they're sitting over here like, crap, like I thought I did such a good job. Like that, I really thought that I did great, given the circumstances of my life or whatever. And that can make a huge impact in your coaching relationship, which then has downstream effects for things like client adherence, client retention, overall success, like really, really big markers in your coaching progress and your client's like success trajectory overall, right? So understanding that and just like realizing that everyone sees things a little bit differently. And as a coach, you can get really pigeonholed into like your idea of like what success looks like and how it should be and all of these things. To remember, all of your clients are not you. They're not coaches. I'm sure, we have a lot of coaches who are clients of ours on my team because of the certification that I run. So people often come over after that to like see how we do things. But for the most part, we're not working with a bunch of coaches. I'm sure there are. I'm thinking about it. I was like, that would be a great like niche to have. It's like, I'm a health and fitness coach that only coaches health and fitness coaches on health and fitness. But anyway, we're not typically coaching health and fitness professionals. So they're likely not thinking the way that we are about things. So having those sort of follow-up questions to further clarify is really important, because it should decide how you respond to that person, the different questions you ask, like honestly, your tone of voice, if you're doing like like Loom responses or voice memos or anything like that. Like, and also any sort of follow-up questions that you have, like it really will determine those things, and it determines the relationship, and it determines your client success down the line.
Yeah. I love that. I think one thing that you kind of made me think of with all of that was just like really looking at like, how do we facilitate the behaviors that we want to facilitate based on like what that person's perspective and their lens is, which that's kind of the $1 million question, right? Again, everybody knows that you should probably eat more vegetables and protein at this point. That is like pretty well spread knowledge at this point, with where the market's at, right? There are still obviously people out there that don't know those things. But the majority, if they've looked at any Healthline article, they will know like, I should eat more vegetables, I should exercise more. And it's like, how do we get that person to do the things, even when they know what's right? And it comes down to that growth versus fixed mindset. So I do want to throw out some definitions here, just so we can make sure everyone's super clear on what those things are. But then kind of getting into like, how do we actually make that change? How do we go from, I know I need to do these things and it's just not happening no matter what I try or what I think I'm trying, to I've actually adopted a mindset shift and now I'm doing the things. How's that sound?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So basic definitions. If we're looking at growth versus fixed mindset, we're essentially trying to say, do you believe that you can change? Do you believe that you can improve, get better, kind of like your own trajectory of success in certain areas? Like, what do you think that looks like, right? So someone with a fixed mindset, in the back of their mind, whether they actually realize it's there or not, and that's the big thing about a fixed mindset, it's often very sneaky. You don't even realize it is what's holding you back. So it requires some self-awareness to even like pinpoint it in the first place. Some people for sure are like, oh yeah, I'm holding myself back all day. Like, I know my thoughts are getting the best of me. Other people are like, I just can't figure out, why I can't stick with this. Like, what's going on? But having a fixed mindset, you're essentially just believing that you can't change. Like, very basic. That could look differently for everyone, right? It could be, I don't believe that I can actually like improve this skill. I don't actually believe that I can get this promotion. I don't believe that I can actually lose weight, whatever it may be. That's sort of like your core belief. And it may not be like that cut and dry either. And you may not realize it's your core belief, but that's what's there. Having a growth mindset on the flip side is just essentially believing that you can change, that you can do these things, that you can develop these skills. You just need to try harder. You just need to figure out the strategies that work well for you. If something happens, setbacks, failures, obstacles, whatever, you can see that as just an opportunity to learn from that, to continue to move forward. Maybe you need to reroute. Maybe you need to find a new strategy, a different resource, a different coach, whatever it may be. It's like never seeing those failures as true, like, I'm not meant to do this, or I shouldn't be doing this, or it's not meant for me, whatever. Because someone with a fixed mindset will often go down that path of like, oh, this got hard. This got challenging. I didn't do this thing right. I only tracked my macros 3 out of 7 days. I guess I can't do this. I knew it all along. I'm not meant to macro track, or whatever it may be. So those are kind of like the basic lay of the land between growth and fixed mindset. Again, there's a lot of ways where people may be listening to this and like, oh no, I definitely feel like I have a growth mindset most of the time, but there are some sneaky things that come up for people that does show an indication of a fixed mindset where you might not even realize it. So that said, kind of like moving back to maybe your example about protein and, how from a coaching perspective, like how do we actually start to leverage some of this stuff to help someone eat more protein? It's like they're over here knowing like, yes, I know I should eat protein. Like, I would honestly hope that most people on the planet understand that like protein is important, at least to a degree at this point. Like, I'd be surprised. But that said, as a coach, you could be thinking that like everyone on the planet should know this by now, so when you go into a client check-in and you realize that someone's not hitting their protein, they could be a total newbie. They could be, vegetarian or brand new to this stuff, has never opened any sort of Healthline article or anything related to protein. And you come to them and say, hey, like, I know that protein is important. So like, let's make sure we get some like ideas for this coming week on how we can hit closer to your numbers. They're going to read that as like, oh my God, like, am I stupid? Like, what am I missing here? Like, that's the most important macro according to my coach. Like, why? Like, I don't understand. So that can leave clients to feel very incompetent. They can lose confidence over things. They can be confused. They can feel like they're not like worthy to a degree, some of these being a little bit more on the extreme side of things, but that's where we are human and our minds can take things and run with them. So it's very possible that's how you're making your client feel, again, without even realizing it, right? Or, you could be saying the exact same thing to another client who maybe is a little bit more advanced or something like that, and saying like, hey, like, we need to hit your protein more this week. Like, here's a list of high protein snacks you could try. Like, let me know if you want any help with this, whatever. And that person could read that check-in and think, are you serious? Like, you don't think I know that cottage cheese is a high protein option? Like, thank you for the idea that I should pick up some beef jerky. Like, of course those things have protein. Like, thanks, Coach Kasey, like really helpful. And then that client could now feel like, just like, it could feel very condescending to them, right? Like, you're sitting over here like, hello, just here's your list of protein options. And they're like, no, duh. Like, you didn't ask me anything else about my life. Like, I just had like the worst week of my life and wasn't able to like get my meals in and hit my protein and do all the things. So you can see in both of those situations where it can be really, really important to better understand like where your clients are coming from, better understand your clients, communicate more, ask more questions, all of those things. And the tough part is in both of those situations, you can drive people down different mindsets, right? So in both of those cases, those clients may end up having more of a fixed mindset about a variety of things, right? So client number one, who was just like uneducated and not understanding and left to feel incompetent, might start to develop a fixed mindset around like their capabilities in the coaching relationship. Like, oh, I should know this stuff. And the fact that I don't makes me less than, makes me like, they may think, I'm not meant to be a client. I'm not cut out for this yet. I shouldn't have a coach yet. Like, I don't know enough. And if they're thinking that, anything you serve up from them, for them from that time forth, anything that they try and anything that is difficult for them requires effort. They do have any other minor setback, it's just going to continue to provide evidence for that core belief that they now have, that they're not good enough, that they don't deserve a coach, that they don't know enough, that anything, right? Whereas on the other example with our more advanced client who felt maybe like the message was a little bit condescending or anything like that, they may end up having a fixed mindset just about like the coaching relationship and how you can help them going forward. They may start to think like, all right, well, Coach Kasey doesn't really know her stuff. This is a problem. Like, she's giving me the most basic information. Like, is this what I'm going to get out of the relationship? Is this what I'm paying $300 a month for? Like, this is ridiculous, So now going forward, if that's the core belief of that person, based on that interaction and how you responded to things, anything else you teach or share or want to like help this person better understand, they will start to think, well, Kasey's not actually going to be able to help me with this. Or maybe they'll start holding back things from you that they do want help on because they don't trust that you can actually give them the information that they need. So now they have a fixed mindset about your ability in the coaching relationship. And in either case, it's a big problem. It's a really big problem. And that's not to say like, if you have this happen, like if there are any coaches listening or anything like that, that now you're just like screwed and this coaching relationship is over, because that would be you having a fixed mindset about the situation. They can definitely be corrected just by asking more questions, just by hearing out your clients a little bit more. If you see them like pulling back or like not giving you as much information as they used to, ask why, ask what's going on, see how you can support them more. And if you're a client on this side, like, I don't want you to think that like because one interaction or because you felt a certain way from your coach, that now that relationship cannot progress the way that you want it to, right? You can do the same thing too. You also have power as the client to ask questions like, hey, like, this isn't really what I was looking for, or I know you probably didn't mean this, but this is how it made me feel. I had a conversation with a client literally 2 weeks ago about this, where she was like, I gave her a bunch of thought questions based on her relationship with the scale. And she came back to me and she was like, hey, I don't think you're really hearing me. It's not necessarily the scale that's bothering me, but it's XYZ, And I was like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for sharing that, because I totally like misread our previous conversation. So that's where it like really does, it takes two to tango, it's a two-way street, it's a relationship. So yeah, before I like take over the next like hour with my examples here, I hope that kind of like paints the picture, I guess, of how mindset can show up in a situation as basic as like protein intake.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks for, again, like how we've evolved as coaches, because before it was just like, hey, send over your macros, send over your workouts. And like, you just send your response, like, here's your updates. And so over the years, like our intake form or, you know, client check-in form has changed and grown and probably has gotten way longer. And we want to know like all the other things that are happening outside of the gym, like what's going on in your life. Like we want that context too. And so we ask so many questions. And I think before it used to be like, oh, okay, here, you know, this is how your week was, here are your macros, see you next week. And now I feel like I'm like, well, I need to ask all these questions first before I can send my check-in response. And like, you want to clarify and you want to get more information. You want to see where they're coming from and get more of that whole picture more than just like this little bit. There are so many different things that I want to take the conversation based off of everything that you said, but I'm sure Marissa's feeling the exact same way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to also point out that I think gets missed a lot by a lot of people is the just the whole concept of the growth versus fixed mindset and how it's not just a black and white thing. I think you kind of brushed over it, and I've heard you talk about this before, but it's a continuum, right? So you might have growth mindset in a lot of areas of life. Like maybe I have growth mindset in my entrepreneurship, but I don't have it as much with my health and fitness or my relationship or, you know, whatever it might be, many things. And so it's like, we can have varying amounts of a growth versus fixed mindset in every area of our life, and can also change just depending on the situations that we're in and how we continue to pour into those beliefs and to try to change them or work with them or feed into the negative ones even. So I think that's an important thing to just talk about as well, because again, someone might be listening to this and be like, oh, I'm super growth oriented. Like I'm always about that. I always want to improve. But then they have like a couple of self-limiting beliefs that are like the bottleneck for their progress in a certain area of their life. So I think one thing that I wanted to kind of rewind and get back to in terms of the fixed mindset, like you said, there might be some people I know I'm thinking of like a couple clients popped in my head where I was like, yep, they know what's holding them back. And then there's some where it's like, there is little to no awareness of like what really is holding that person back. And so what would you say, or what are some ways that you can help someone identify that fixed mindset thinking in themselves, or, you know, for coaches to help others identify that in themselves?
Yeah, for sure. And it's tough because if you don't know what needs changing, how do you change it? Right. And that's like the basis of awareness and why it is so important. It's quite literally the first thing I teach in pretty much anything is like, you need to become aware first before we can talk about anything else. So with that said, there's a couple different ways we can go with this, but a lot of times for coaches, especially coaches who have gone through my certification, no, I'm just kidding. Coaches who like understand, you know, what to look for in like fixed mindset language, things like if clients use words like always or never, you know, very like, this is the way it has to be. This is how it's always been. I've never been able to like stick with this, or like, okay, sure, we can start a diet phase, but just, you know, like I'm not very good at this stuff, or it's never worked for me before. I've tried everything. You know, if someone's going into something with that sort of fixed mindset, like the chances of you actually being successful are unfortunately relatively low, because you're just already expecting things to not go according to plan or how you would ideally like them to, right? So as a coach, if you can grab that right away, instead of just being like, great, she's going to be a real fun one to work with, you know, and just like trying anyway, you can grab that and go like, okay, this is really important. This client has a very strong fixed mindset about this. If we don't start to work through some of this stuff, nothing else is going to work. So of course, as the coach, you don't want to just go to this client and be like, your mindset sucks. Like, let's do something about it. Like, I'm sure there are some clients, like I definitely have clients where I could probably go to and be like, yo, do you realize what you just said? But going to them and saying like, hey, so I'm going to point something out to you. I think this is really important, and it's going to make a massive difference in how successful we are, you know, in this dieting phase or whatever it may be. But hearing you say, you know, and like pull out specific phrases, use their words, really is indicative of the fact that you may have a fixed mindset about this specific thing. Now, I don't want you to like freak out or be upset or get defensive, because this is something that we can change. And, you know, again, if you have like a certification background, whatever in this area, you could say, I have, you know, the tools and the education and the training to actually help you work through this. So I'm excited about it. I want you to be excited about it too. So doing your best to like present it in that light, because also what's tough is a lot of times with people who have a fixed mindset in an area and also aren't aware of it, they become very defensive and want to like justify the way that they're thinking and their actions and things like that, which can go obviously the other direction very quickly. So coming at it like maybe more gentle, trying to explain to them like, this is something really good that we can like work on together and that will actually ultimately make you more successful, and presenting it in that light. And then starting to ask them, more questions around that specific thought. Okay, you're telling me that you've never been successful before, even though you feel like you've tried everything. Can you tell me a little bit more about those experiences? Like, what have you tried? What did that look like? How did it feel? Like, how long did you give those experiences before, throwing in the towel and starting again? Like really just try to like paint a better picture there, because what can happen sometimes too is when clients are working through that, they may start to like explain things in a different light now, looking back on it, right? Because right now they just have this idea in their head that they can't do it based on previous experiences, but they haven't really revisited those experiences since then. It's just like been like the deciding factor of like where they're going from now on. So you sit down and ask them these questions and they have to like reflect on them. They may go back and start to think, oh yeah, well, I tried the keto diet and then I did this like super quick fix thing. And then I think it was the 21-day fix after that. And then the whole 30, come to think about it, everything I've done is like super short term and it was never like a coaching relationship. And I didn't have guidance from someone like you before. So I guess we can't really like compare it as much. And you can sit there as a coach and be like, oh, really? You don't say, which is really, really so crucial and so powerful when the client can like come to that like solution and understanding on their own versus you being like, okay, so everything else you've tried was a quick fix, right? So like, isn't this different? They're going to get defensive and they're going to try to like justify it. If they decide and they come to that conclusion on their own, it's so much more powerful. So that can be the power of like asking more questions and helping them like recognizing some of these things on their own. And only then can they actually like this, that honestly, if you can get a client to start to do something like that, they're already making their way towards a growth mindset, right? Because they're recognizing that what happened before is not the same as it is now. So they can't necessarily compare. It's not the same thing. So having that can be a massive light bulb moment in the direction of a growth mindset. So that's one way for sure, is just to kind of get more understanding around that thought that they're having and where it came from, the triggers that triggers that trigger it, and just a better understanding of what that underlying core belief is and how it was developed in the first place.
I love that. And I love that we are basically already talking about motivational interviewing now. So we can dive right into that. Great transition. And so like for those who are listening, who have no idea what motivational interviewing is essentially like what Kasey just described, of asking more questions to help the clients come to their own conclusions about things, because it's always going to be 20 times more powerful, if not more, for that person to feel like they actually have buy-in with the process and with the conclusion and the direction that they're going. So I mean, that's kind of where we were going next, was like, how do we then create that growth mindset? How do we move someone towards that? And I think even the way that I say that question is like almost a little counterintuitive or backwards, because I'm like, how do we make someone do this? Well, we don't. We like help them figure out how to get there themselves. But like, we're just like kind of just nudging them a little bit. Right. And so, I mean, what do you think we are missing in terms of the motivational interviewing topic as a whole, of how people can not only use this as a coach, because again, we have a small handful of coaches that listen to this podcast, but just like, how can we ask ourselves the right questions as individuals to help guide our success?
Yeah, for sure. And I absolutely adore how you presented that, is that it's not like, as a coach, right, you're never like shifting someone else's mindset. Like I just kind of explained, they need to come to those conclusions on their own. And sure, you can guide them there and you can ask the right questions to hopefully have them arrive there, but you cannot shift someone else's mindset. Like it needs to be something internal. Like I kind of laid out the definitions at the beginning. It's someone's decision and like belief in their ability to make a change. It is not like my coach is telling me that I can change, which is honestly, I was just talking to someone about this on my call before this, but I don't like the terminology, even like mindset coach. Like I have to use it because that's what like my community uses, but it's tough for me because it's like, yeah, you have a fitness coach. Yeah, you have a nutrition coach. They're helping you like write a plan and they're helping you create a program that produces progressive overload and all these things, but that's not how mindset works, right? So you can't really like coach someone on mindset. I guess maybe it's semantics and how you define coach for sure. But to be honest, you're more of like a mindset guide, but that doesn't sound as great. So for sure, that's really important to point out. And it's to the degree where I don't call myself a mindset coach. None of the coaches on my team are mindset coaches. And we make that very clear. Like, we're health and fitness coaches that understand the science of mindset and can help you create long-term behavior changes because of it. And it's interesting too, because people will get on the phone with us and be like, oh, okay, so can you tell me more about like the mindset component? Like, how does that work? Like, what are we doing on a week-to-week basis? And I'm like, that's not really, what we're doing here. It's very much so like in between the lines. It's like to the point where you may not even realize that your coach is helping you and guiding you towards a growth mindset. It's all based in like the way that they're presenting information, how they're asking certain questions. And of course, we'll have like journal prompts and things like that are a little bit more direct, but a lot of it is just like embedded in the relationship, which is really, really cool. But also like, that's how it needs to be done. It's not this like, okay, let's do our mindset call for the month and like start shifting your mindset. Like that's not really how it works. But anyway, yes, motivational interviewing is a big part of that, because motivational interviewing itself is an evidence-based practice for communication. It's like a method of communication. And it's not something that you're like doing to someone. It's something that you're doing with them. It's part of the conversational process. So it's how you're, actually just made a reel about this. It was from the IFCA presentation. Actually, I turned it into a reel, got fancy with that. But reflective listening is a really big component of that. So instead of just like hearing someone say, I'm really frustrated about this and I don't really like where my progress is going, and just being like, okay, here's how we can fix it. This is what we can do, and kind of just like having that knee-jerk reaction, but instead saying like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you're not really happy with the amount of effort that you're putting in for the results that you're getting. Does that sound right? Like, are we on the same page? And, that has so many perks and benefits from a mindset perspective, from a behavior change perspective, a relationship perspective, all of those things. You can better understand where the client is coming from. Your client will have a better idea of like what they're expressing to you. It will deepen the relationship. It'll keep you from doing anything that is like condescending or like making them feel incompetent or anything like that, just by asking those questions and reflecting back what they said. There's a lot of other components of motivational interviewing. It was actually all of the research and kind of where it was born out of was in addiction counseling, which is really interesting, but it's essentially helping people in an in-person fashion, like sitting down with someone and talking with them about their ambivalence towards change. So like, I know I should quit smoking, but I'm really not wanting to because of all of these other benefits that it gives me, or it's really hard for me, and like kind of walking them through that process, and has now been kind of moved into all different other areas of behavior change, including health, fitness, like eating fruits and vegetables. Like, so there's so many different research studies out there using motivational interviewing in those contexts. What's interesting is that we live in a world now where we don't sit down with our clients face to face for like an hour once a week or anything like that. So kind of translating some of this stuff to the online space is interesting, and it's obviously not like formatted for that. So I do my best in the certification and when I'm working with other coaches and like with our clients at KJO, the one-on-one coaching side of my business, to translate some of this stuff to like, okay, how do we do this in a voice memo or in a situation, where we're not having a back and forth conversation, this is via email or text message. Like, how can we still utilize some of these concepts of motivational interviewing to help from a behavior change and mindset perspective? So I love it. I love that I'm trying to like bridge this gap a little bit. It does make me sad sometimes that I'm not still in academia and can't like actually test some of this stuff. But yeah, I feel like I went in so many directions. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just thinking, so I was a high school counselor for a while, and I would have parents come to me and, whatever issue they were having with their kid, and I'd talk with the kid, and the whole time, just asking questions. And a lot of times the kids would be like, "Miss, I came to you for advice." And I'm like, well, that's not what a counselor does. But, eventually we get to the point where they would come to a conclusion, and I'd get on the phone, talk with the parents, and they're like, well, that's what I told them. And I'm like, yes, but now the kid is the one who made the decision. And that's why it's so much more powerful. And like talking to the parents about how to kind of help facilitate if things happen in the future. But that was just one of my favorite things, is like the misconception of like, oh, you know, you go see a counselor, you go see a coach, and they just tell you everything that you need to hear, or they, you know, they change your life. And it's like, no, it's not quite like that. There was something else I wanted to say that I just slipped my mind. So when it comes to the motivational interviewing and bringing that into the online space, so how would you, because I think you have a couple clients where it's like I have their check-ins and I'll respond back and ask all the good questions, and then you get nothing back because until the next week when they send in their check-in interview. So kind of like how to bridge that gap, because yeah, it'd be great if we could get on phone calls and talk to our clients face to face, and that would make it a lot easier. So like maybe how that looks bridging the gap.
Yeah, for sure. And there is like, to some degree, right? Like you could add phone calls to your coaching practice. You know, it's not, you know, it's something that does take more time. It likely will make it a more expensive service, things like that. But this is a very high level example, and we'll talk about like how to actually fit these in. But you could add that, right? We have an option at KJO that does include phone calls. We have an option that doesn't. So some people, you know, based on like what they need and what they're wanting to work on, they need the phone calls, and like that's going to be super crucial for them. Or, you know, every once in a while it's a situation where you're having this back and forth, and like this client just seems to like not be getting it. Something's not clicking, like you can't figure out what's going on. It's like, it will save you time not going back and forth every single week to just be like, let's get on the phone for 15 minutes and like actually talk this through. It will save you so much time. It'll make the relationship better. The client will feel great that you went out of your way to like schedule that quick phone call. So like, that's always an option, but I totally understand from like a business and scalability perspective that you cannot be getting on a phone with your clients every single week. Like it's just like, can you imagine if you have like a roster of 55 clients, like that's not going to happen. So with that said, I do think we, in this day and age, we have the ability to like really communicate with our clients almost to the degree as if we were sitting there, like, look at us in Zoom right now. Like it's very similar, right? So leveraging some of that stuff. And I understand where you're coming from, where it's like, gosh, I have so many good questions in here and this is going to be so great. And it's like, they didn't respond to any of them. Yeah. So I get that too. Some of the just like quick tips, almost like from a systematic perspective that I share with the coaches that I mentor through the certification, is that you could, one, kind of to some degree, without this sounding like malicious, like withhold all of their check-in information until they answer those questions. So something I'll do is like, honestly, I'm on like a text basis with a lot of my clients that I've had for years at this point. So I'll be going through their check-in, reading through all of their form responses, and are like, okay, so I definitely have some questions I want to dive in a little bit deeper here from like a mindset perspective. I'll text them quick and be like, hey, I'm going through your check-in. Like before I send everything over, can you answer these couple questions for me? So it's sort of like, let's make that happen first and ensure that it happens. Because one of the things too, it's not like your clients are listening and reading through your check-in and going like, all right, I'm not going to answer those questions. Like a lot of the times it's just like, this is a lot of information and they totally forget, you know, or they don't realize also that you want a response, that it's more of like a rhetorical question, you know, like just think about it and keep it to yourself type of thing. So also just being a little bit more clear in your communication can be good too. So it's like, you could talk about it throughout the voice memo. Maybe at the end of the voice memo, you're like, would really love to hear what your thoughts are on the questions that I asked earlier. Like, please get back to me as soon as you can, preferably before your next check-in. You know, setting those expectations can be really helpful. Or, you know, another option is to, if you're doing something like what we do, is like a voice memo or a Loom video and an email. So, and it's all going through an email. So the email body could maybe hold those specific questions, and you'd be like, important, highlight, bold, please answer these, respond to this email with your answers to these questions, you know, something like that. So there's like I said, kind of from like a systematic perspective, ways to like kind of get around this. And if with those questions, if you feel like there's a pattern here, it's like client keeps forgetting, they're not doing it, they don't fully understand. It's like doing the like answer these questions first before we talk about what your macros are going to look like for this week, can also just make it very clear how important that stuff is too. And then they may shift their behavior over time to be like, okay, so like she like actually wants me to answer these questions. You know, it's not just like for my own sake, my own like in my head journaling entry.
Yeah, no, those are great. Those are great. And I think that, I mean, we always talk, Marissa and I are like the exact same when it comes to our processes, our check-ins and all that. So yeah, we do have like the Loom video, and then we have the body or kind of like recap. And I think that's great, kind of adding in a section like, hey, these are questions I would love to get responses by. So I think that's a really just super easy thing that just to add in.
Yeah. I think, just like over the years, like the number one thing that like I just feel very validated hearing, obviously, but like listening to all of this and just what I've learned from like kicking my fix it reflex to the curb and like really just like not being the person that's like, all right, you struggled to hit your protein. I got you. Here's like another recipe guide out of my like 8 million. Like they don't need that. And really just kicking that reflex to the curb and becoming a reflective listener, becoming someone who just the best answer to a question is another question. And it annoys some of my clients because they know what's coming at this point. And they're like, you're probably just going to ask me a question once I ask you this, but like, what do you think we should do here? And then I'll be like, oh, what do you think we should do? And then they're just like, oh, well, and then they come to the conclusion and it works out, but it's hilarious. But I think just when it comes to, I think people trying to self-navigate this journey, because we do have a lot of those that listen to this podcast, because we often don't necessarily have a sounding board that is trained to ask us questions back to our questions, would be to just like have some form of reflection with yourself, whether that's like sitting down and intentionally asking yourself, okay, well, I'm struggling with this. Like, why? What can I do? Like, what are my potential options? Or like looking for someone, whether that's a coach or a journal prompt or something that's going to help you better reflect upon yourself. Because oftentimes, like, I think one thing I noticed you said, Kasey, was like, when we have a fixed mindset about something, it's like all of these thoughts just like crammed together to like one conclusion that like isn't broken out yet. So when we have the opportunity to just like break it down, explain things, have more clarity with ourselves about something, it's like the solution almost always just becomes apparent. But it's just because our minds are so like clustered at times, it's like we just need a sounding board in some way, shape, or form. So I would definitely just encourage anybody who is self-navigating to just try to find a way to like hear yourself talk through these things and ask yourself questions, even if you don't have a coach or someone who can be that sounding board for you.
That's really good. And actually, there's a piece of cognitive behavioral therapy that is somewhat similar to this. And some of CBT can actually be done with yourself. So there's like workbooks for this and things like that, but like a very basic thing that you can do once you've determined, what this kind of like negative thought is or core belief that you're trying to break through and better understand it, like you're saying. So instead of like letting it just like ruminate and turn into like these other things and create like other gremlin thoughts and things like that, like actually sitting down and thinking, okay, so what is this thought that I have? And then from there, going through like, what is the evidence that I have for this thought? Because the truth is, right, you're not thinking that, you're not having that sort of belief based on zero evidence. Like it's coming from somewhere, right? So what evidence do you have? Like kind of going back to the example I had before, person who's like, oh, I've tried everything, all these things didn't work. It's like, what's the evidence that you have that you believe that you can't do this? And it's like, well, I've tried other things in the past and it didn't work. I wasn't successful. It's like, okay, like that's true evidence for that, right? Like accepting that, but then also weighing it against what evidence do you have against it? Against the thought, right? So thinking, okay, so if your core belief, your core thought, your negative thing that you're trying to break here is the assumption that you can't be successful, that you can't do it, that you can't go through a successful dieting phase, right? So evidence against that would be like, well, everything I tried in the past were these like quick fixes, these short programs, nothing that was really based on like habit change or mindset or long-term behavior changes or lifestyle development. So, I don't really have evidence for the fact that I can't do this now in this different strategy. You may also think, I've been successful with a lot of other health and fitness things, just not those specific programs. And you'll notice very quickly too that the evidence against list gets much longer than the evidence for list, which is a good kind of perspective to have like right out the gates. But then kind of like going through that, deciding, okay, well, what's the most accurate depiction of this thought now that I've seen all the evidence for and all the evidence against it, right? And in this case, for this example, this person, it might be something like, okay, I've definitely, had some tough times in the past trying to lose weight, trying to go through a diet. However, those kind of quick fix programs may have just not been the best option for me and not something that actually suits my lifestyle. So it would be silly to assume that anything I try going forward wouldn't work too. So like kind of having that more accurate, true reality, like not like hiding anything from yourself and like not lying to yourself. This is literally the truth based on the evidence. And then that can feel just so much better, just walking through that, using that as a journal prompt, using it as a thought exercise as you're driving home from work, whatever. You can actually feel the difference like in your demeanor and how like your mood around all of this, thinking like, okay, I actually have a better handle on this now. You know, I actually can see it for what it is versus like all these things that I've been telling myself or just making assumptions off of. And really recognizing how that does make you feel differently, because that is what's going to carry you forward into being more successful in the future and coming back to that like more accurate depiction. So that's just something that it made me think of when you were mentioning, oh, this is, you could do this with yourself too. And like, you absolutely can. Like, in fact, you could do like CBT on yourself to some degree.
Yeah, I actually have a question about that because, you know, like you, the way that you painted that made me curious, because something that we work with, probably Christina as well, but we work with our clients a lot on is monitoring and just like really taking a look at self-talk and the way that we think to ourselves, that we talk to ourselves throughout the day, throughout the week. Because it's like when you sit down and you do that journal prompt, or you do CBT on yourself, or you talk with your coach and they ask you all the right questions, like you build this momentum right at the beginning of the week, or whenever your check-in is, or whenever you do that exercise where you've now shifted, right? But almost the way that that was painted, and I don't think it's any fault on your point, but I do want to get some clarity here, is like, once that shifts, then like we're good moving forward. Like we got it, like our mindset has changed and we are good to go. We're going to succeed, which like, again, doesn't really pan out. And oftentimes we like lose momentum through the week, or the farther and farther away we get from the check-in, the more we forget those things and the negative self-talk creeps back in. So just wanted to make a point there that like, it's probably not like a one shift and we're done type of deal. It's something we continue to work on, but in the spirit of continuing to work on that self-talk, you know, what are some tools and tricks that you use with your clients or teacher coaches in terms of, first of all, becoming aware of that self-talk, and then actually making moves on it and trying to monitor that or shift that over time?
Yeah, totally. Can you imagine if I was like, no, you just do that one time and you're good. It's like, no, that's what I meant. So, yeah, it's constant work, right? And that's funny because we have a book club for my one-on-one clients, and they're reading Mindset right now by Carol Dweck. And something that came up was like, something I've realized is that I'm definitely developing a growth mindset, but it's not actually getting like easier. Like it's still effortful. And I was like, yes, that's how that works. Is like, it may become more like second nature or a little bit more automatic to like lean into challenging things and like pick yourself apart and see where you can improve and things like that from a growth mindset perspective. But that doesn't mean that like the work stops, you know, it doesn't get any less like effortful. Like it's still going to feel uncomfortable a lot of the times and things like that. So
just like lifting.
With that said, yeah, exactly. With that said, kind of trying to find this negative self-talk, it's tough, right? Because a lot of times we're doing it so automatically, which is super sad, that it's just like, it's habitual. So when things are habitual, when they're automatic and that sort of thing, it does require a lot of self-awareness to be brought to it in order to start to shift it and make a difference, or start to reframe, find a new perspective, use different words, whatever it may be. So honestly, it's going to sound super simple and like, would this actually work? But just pay attention, you know, like literally like wake up one day and set an intention to think like, if anything negative comes across my mind today about myself, like I'm going to like notice it. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to, you know, tell someone else about it, whatever it may be that you need to like really like extract it from your brain. That's what you need to do. And like, I would say, put a cap on it, right? 24-hour period, 2 days, whatever it may be. Like that's your intention for the day, is to just really, really try to pay attention. Because the problem is, right, we don't have those intentions. We don't pay attention. It just happens. And then we just like find ourselves feeling like mopey and not great about like ourselves and our progress and things like that. So just being really intentional about picking it out, but not necessarily trying to change it right away, can be really helpful. Because then you can come to the end of the day with this list, which is not going to be a very happy list. You know, it's like, oh, I don't like how I feel in these clothes today, or like, why are my arms so flabby? Or like, you have this like list of all these things that you say to yourself, but that can be a really huge wake up call too. And I think from a growth mindset perspective, looking at that list and thinking, I can't believe I'm saying all these things to myself. Like, this should not stand, this is not okay, and if someone else were to say these things to me, I would be furious, So like really trying to take that perspective of like, I need to talk to myself better. If someone else wouldn't say these things to me, and instead of seeing it as a list of like, yeah, these are all the things that are wrong with me. Glad I did this activity today. You have to go into it with the perspective of like, this is information gathering so I can improve, so I can get better, so I can feel better about myself, my life, and my progress, and all of those things. And then use it from that perspective. And then from there, you can kind of go into like the next day, next week, or what, maybe you need some time, whatever, and go into like, okay, when those thoughts crop up, how do I reframe them? How can I say them differently? And to be honest, if you have a list in front of you too, like there's your next journal activity, like literally take those line by line and shift them into something that is a more positive, more self-affirming, more self-respecting, self-loving type of phrase, and start to work through that, because that will also then help you when you do run into those thoughts again, because you will, especially when they are this automatic. It will make it so much easier for you to make that reframe and change what you're saying to yourself if you've already taken the time to spend some time planning of like what you would say instead. Just makes it so much more salient and easier to like grab a hold of cognitively when you're in that moment doing something habitual. It's like, because you can all day say like, okay, here's my list of like all the crappy things I've said to myself. Great. We move on. And now it's like, you're still saying crappy things to yourself. And now you're noticing it. It's like, oh, okay, I wish I could say something better, but I got nothing, because this is what I'm thinking right now. But if you took that time to go through the list, 2 days before, a week before, whatever, you could have that some thought very similar or that exact same thought and think like, oh, this is what I need to say to myself instead. Or like, oh, I actually have a better thing that I can say based on, what I said before.
Yeah, I love taking it from the perspective of like, okay, you say all these like awful things about yourself throughout the day and you don't maybe even realize it. But like, what if you had someone else saying those things to you? Like every single day you had a spouse or you had a boss who said all the, like, you would be like, wow, I don't want to be with this. Like, I don't want to be around that person. And then thinking like, wow, I say all these things about myself. And so like, why would I want to spend time with myself? Like, and maybe add that to the list, right? But I love the idea of reframing. So it's like, like I'm not where I want to be with my health and fitness goals yet. Or like, I hate my flabby arms, but I'm working on them, or like whatever it might be to kind of help going in that direction. So I think that's a really, really good and really powerful journal prompt to take the things that you say and like, how can you reframe them? Like, how can you, or like moving forward, like you catch yourself in the process of like, and I think that that's such a huge step. So it's like, yeah, maybe you're not like this. And I feel like the other misconception is like having this growth mindset is like, oh, you talk to yourself like so perfectly and you never have these thoughts, but it's like, it's how you redirect or like, so a really good example I was listening to today with an ISCA call, of course, someone was like, how do I do this? I'm just not organized. And instead of the coach saying, oh, well, to get more organized, you should do X, Y, Z. He was like, well, I'm going to stop you there. And let's talk about how you just talked about yourself first. And so if you continue to tell yourself that you're not organized, you're going to have that limiting belief. And so instead of saying that, like, think I'm working on my organization. And like, how can we improve it? And so she was like, wow, yeah, you're right. And so I think it's so small and you might think it's kind of like woo woo, like all the positive self-talk, but it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. I made a post about this the other day because I firmly believe that the way that I was parented was very unique. And I'm very blessed to be in the position that I am because my dad growing up didn't allow me to use the word try as in like I'm trying to do something, because trying implies that you fail at it. You're not actually doing the thing, you're just trying. So like he took that very literally and he was like, no, you're not trying to do anything, just do it. And like that language for me, like as a kid was like, it didn't make any sense to me then, but I'm looking back and I'm like, God damn, that man was smart. Right. And so that like, obviously like not using, well, maybe not obviously, but he like, we wouldn't use the word can't. It's, I choose not to do this thing, not I can't do this thing. And just like the way that language was used growing up. And like, I'm very blessed for that because like most people don't grow up in a household household where like that sort of stuff is just like burned into you. But one thing that I wanted to add, my brain went in a billion different directions. So I'm going to try to like bring it all back together at some point, but we'll see how that goes. But with the self-talk regulation, I know that a lot of times we use those absolutes like can't, and I'm just trying to be better, or I have to try harder, or I always do this, I always do that. And we use these absolutes so critically with ourselves, and like we paint a picture of ourselves that way. And sometimes it's so deeply burned into our mind that saying something like, oh, I'm gonna flip the script, like I'm gonna go from I hate the way that I look to I love the way that I look today. And that's like, whoa, like that, I'm definitely bullshitting myself here. Like that's nope, that is not true. And so like for a lot of people who like have really just poor relationships with themselves, starting from a place of, and I like how there's a common theme here of first we build awareness, then we accept what's going on, and then we try to change it. And there's time in between each of those steps. With the acceptance step, one thing that we have our clients do is we go from negative to neutral. So instead of going from negative to positive, we take, oh, I hate my arms today, to just, this is the way that my arms look today. And then we go from there. We don't force any changes moving forward, but then we start to just make the whole, this is how this is today, is the reflexive. And then we can start working that towards like, how can I make this a little bit more positive, right? And then inching towards that, because a lot of times it's like, I love the way that I look so beautiful today, when like you have a crappy self-image, like that's not gonna fly. Like that's just gonna like set off your bullshit detectors, and you're not going to actually create change by just telling yourself things you truly don't believe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. That's so important. And I think especially in health and fitness. And, I think like something that comes to mind is like relationships with the scale and things like that, because so often I think it's like you either hate the scale or like what you're supposed to love the scale. You don't have to love looking at your body weight every day. Like what we try to do, very similar to what you're saying, is work towards like neutrality with it. It's like you just step on the scale and you're like, okay, this is how much I weigh today. The end. Wouldn't it be awesome if it had like zero impact on how you're feeling or like how the rest of your day goes or anything? Like in some cases, like neutrality should be the end goal. Of course, when it comes to like body image and things like that, we would like to get to a point where it's like, you're not just like, okay, this is how I look. It's like, I'm actually like pretty proud of myself, and it doesn't always have to like link back to like your looks either. Like I'm a strong supporter of the fact that you can be wanting to change your body composition and what you look like and things like that, while still loving and respecting and accepting where you currently are. So even just trying to get to the point of like, instead of like, God, I'm so sick of looking like this, like, why is nothing changing? And coming to a place of like, okay, I would like to change some things. I'm actively working to do it. I'm really proud of myself for doing that. So I just need to, keep pushing forth. And eventually, I'll get to a place where I'm like really happy with like my results, but I'm not quite there yet, like you were saying, Christina. So I think that's all super important. And I love the kind of step-by-step process of moving from a place of like, this is a negative thought 100% to like, let's just like get a little bit more neutral with it. And it does come from a place of acceptance. And it's really interesting too, because this ties back to a lot of the research that we've done in the like mindset sphere when it comes to shifting someone's perspective to be more growth mindset oriented. What often happens is that as growth mindset goes up, things like guilt and shame and things like that also go up, because people are recognizing, I can change. I'm in control of this. I can make a difference in like how I look or what's going on, which also means I'm 100% responsible for where I'm currently at. So it can be damaging in that way, where it's like, oh, now I know that I am responsible for my body weight, which also means it's totally my fault that I'm overweight and obese and have all these like health problems and things like that, which can make you feel like really terrible about yourself. So this was something that we had a hard time in the literature, like when we're doing studies on people's mindset and helping them shift their mindsets. Like we know growth mindset is so good and so crucial for success, but this stuff cannot come along with it. Like, how do we do this? So the thing, how we called it in the research is compensatory messaging, basically a fancy way of saying like, how do we make people believe in their ability to change without feeling like they're to blame for their current reality? It's tough. It's really tough. And unfortunately, it's like I go to social media and it's like we're doing this stuff all of the time. Like, you can change, you can do all these things, like go you, like all of this stuff. And then people are like, yeah, you keep telling me all of this, but that sucks because like, do you see what my current reality is? And I can't like stay consistent. And that's all my fault. And like, whew, it can be like very difficult for me to see all of that stuff and like understand that like we need to shift this messaging, but also like how do you do that? Right. So it's definitely something interesting and tough to figure out. But I think the more we can kind of like display those messages of like, it is okay to be where you are right now, even if it's not like what you ultimately want. It is okay that like you're not happy with like your results yet and you're still working towards it. Using the word yet in general, and just like reminding people that like you may have like these bigger dreams, or you want these results, or you wish you were seeing progress faster, but that doesn't have to mean that like where you currently are sucks, you know, just like all putting that message out there just as much as like, you can do it, you know? So yeah, man, I could jam on this stuff forever.
Marissa brought up, sorry, I was gonna say, Marissa brought up something. So again, I'm gonna continue with my counselor background. So I've done high school and I've done elementary, and I tell the kids every time I do I do growth mindset, you know, growth versus fix. And I tell the kids every single time, I'm like, this is what I wish my counselor had taught me when I was your age. Like, because I don't know when, and like, yeah, I'm sure that the idea and like certain thought processes, but I didn't hear like the actual terms growth versus fixed until a certain point in my life where I was like, wow, like this makes so much sense. And like having an actual name to what it was and being able to kind of see it a lot better and like conceptualize it was just so cool. But I thought that like, wow, like this is, if I could teach anything to the kids, like this is what it is. Cause it's like, at the end of the day, you're in control of your life, how you view things. So that kind of made me think of Marissa, like, is that something that you feel like is good to introduce kids to at an early age? Or is it something that they should see like themes of and then eventually get it as they get older? Or kind of like, I don't know how the best way to like introduce someone to that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I look back and I'm grateful because of the way that it had manifested in my life, but I could also see it going in the opposite direction of like someone taking that and taking so much personal responsibility that it's all their fault and being so hard on themselves and extra critical. And like my wheels started turning as soon as Kasey started talking about like, you know, how do we empower people without like bringing up that shame and that guilt, which is essentially what like fad diets and like weight loss medications do, right? It's not your fault. There's actually this external thing that's happening to you that's making you have high blood pressure. It's making you have obesity. So you just have to do this thing and not assume responsibility for your actions. That's dangerous too. So how do we give people personal responsibility without shaming them? And I think the example that I gave about the way that my dad talked to me as a kid, it was very encouraging and empowering of just like not ever telling me that I had limits or that I couldn't do something, but just like, hey, like, let's shift your language here because I want you to know and believe that you can do anything that you want to do. It's just like, you're choosing not to in this moment. So in my experience, I had a really good experience with all of that. I guess I could see where it would go south, but I think what you do or did with your counseling students, I mean, the earlier they can get exposed to that, the better, because that's like ingrained in their development, right? So we're both psych nerds, Kasey. My bachelor's was in neuroscience. She was a counselor, nice. Psych major. So we love this stuff. But yeah, I mean, the earlier you can kind of ingrain that and groom it, while it is easier to develop and continue to change someone, obviously not changing them, but helping them change themselves, I think would be beneficial. But I'm interested to hear Kasey's take on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, the majority of the mindset research is with children, with students, with things like that, with coming to like aspects of like intelligence. Like, do you actually believe you can change your intelligence, and like how that shows up in their academic careers and things like that. A lot of it is with children. Honestly, a lot of research, even in say like health and fitness and obesity and stuff like that, is with children for those same reasons that you were saying, of like, as they're like developing and creating, like assigning meaning to their lives, literally developing their mindsets. Like, if you can get in there then with some of these messages and helping them like shape their reality in that way and their perspectives, it's crucial. You know, like for instance, for my dissertation, I so badly wanted to do something with adult women and strength training and how mindset plays a role in those things, and like vice versa, right? I'm not going to find funding for that anywhere. No one cares enough about that. What I got to do was work in an obesity clinic with children and help those children shift their mindset to see how that adds to the program that they were already doing to help with health and fitness and family and things like that. So there's just like, there's so much more attention, there's so much more funding because of this understanding that if we can get in when they're younger, it will carry on into adulthood, right? And that's not to say that adults can't change. Like, you're in neuroscience, like you understand that neuroplasticity is indeed a thing. Like, your brain is constantly changing even as you are older. But there definitely is a little bit more attention, for a good reason, on like younger populations in this area. And like I said, that's where all this mindset research really started, was with children, and seeing like, wow, this is really effective with them. Like, can we do it with adults too? And like, we can. But yeah, for sure. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm so glad that you had a parent figure in your life kind of like helping you out along the way.
Yeah. I asked him the other day, I was like, so like, you did that all on purpose, right? Like, you thought through that? And he was like, like kind of, like just the way I am. And I was like, all right, you're too smart for your own good. But before this episode gets too long, obviously we want to make sure we close any gaps, anything we haven't talked about, haven't covered, and also give you the time to talk about what you offer, what you do, and just plug that kind of stuff in. So yeah, tell us what you have going on and what you offer for coaches, for people, and how that can benefit.
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of describe, the two arms of my business to some degree. I honestly feel like I run two separate businesses most of the time. So one arm of my business being KJO coaching, which is the one-on-one health and fitness coaching, a part of my business with my 5 wonderful assistant coaches. And then the other side of my business is coaching other coaches on a lot of the things that we talked about in this episode when it comes to behavior change, mindset, psychology, and understanding how to leverage the science of those things with their own clients. And it's one of those things, like, I listen to both of you and I'm like, you guys are good coaches. Like, you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about. And it's unfortunate that the coaches out there who aren't that way are not the ones who are coming to my certification. You guys would be more likely to, because you're already good coaches and you understand the importance of this stuff. And you're like, I want to get better, growth mindset. So that said, we have a lot of coaches from a lot of different walks of life, whether you're brand new, you're 10 years seasoned. We've had doctors, nurses, counselors, social workers go through the program too. But it's really like my bread and butter. It's my favorite thing. Like, the fact that I basically get to do what I just did today, but on a weekly basis, and talk about these concepts and how to apply it with client cases and things like that. Super, super fun. At least I think so, from like a super nerdy perspective. But yeah, those are kind of like my two main things.
I think like even parents could benefit from it too, like how to talk to your kid versus like,
get that. Yeah, I get that a lot. It's like, because a lot of the coaches who go through the program are also parents, and the number of times they're like, oh, this is actually helping me figure out how to get my kids to eat more vegetables, like it's, and not only with that, but I know we talked about motivational interviewing a lot, but like that can be helpful when you're sitting down and having a conversation with a friend who's needing to like make a hard life decision or something like that. Like, psychology is great because it's literally freaking everywhere and in everything.
Yeah. And I think it's so powerful too. Like, we're talking about students, and I'm going off track now, but you have a group of students and you tell them like, oh, you guys are so smart, versus like, oh, you guys are such hard workers. And like, so something just is like a parent talking to their kid, just like something so small, and how you can change your language can just make a world of a difference. So I would say, I would recommend that your certification to anyone, even if you're not a coach, just if you're trying to take advantage and learn a little bit more, and how, like you mentioned, just even helping a friend. So the last couple questions we have for you is maybe kind of your best tips, or maybe like a good a good mindset or like a frame for someone who's just starting out? Maybe they're a brand new client, maybe they're starting with a coach for the first time. What would you say maybe the way that they can approach that to have the best experience going through that process?
Yeah, I think honestly, this could go for clients or coaches. But number one, be more aware, right? Just pay more attention to what you're thinking, how you're saying things, how you're approaching things. Like if you're a client, you're diving into a coaching relationship and you're getting frustrated with like progress or not being able to show up for something, like spend some time thinking like, where's this coming from? Just like dive a little bit deeper and become more aware of all those things. Again, like I said this before, but before you even feel like you need to change anything, like just pay more attention. And the second thing being, just ask more questions. Again, this could be on either side of the spectrum. As a client, ask more questions, both for like your learning capability, like, why are we doing this? Can you explain this to me more? But also, asking more along the lines of like, how can I work on this? How can I be better? Like, what else should I do in order to like continue to improve in this area? And obviously from the coaching side of the spectrum, asking more questions, getting to know your clients better understanding their core beliefs and their triggers and all of those things, not only to deepen the relationship, but so you can actually coach them better. I think that that like wraps up the entire episode.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, I love that. So we ask all of our guests that come on this podcast the same question. So if we could get the number one tip for living a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, what would that be?
It's loaded.
I want to go super simple and like have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, I feel like that's what I feel like I have to say. But at the same time, it's like I also know, granted, I'm very biased, but like I really do think that that's at the core of so many things. Health and fitness and beyond is like understanding why you think the way you do about certain things and your perspective, the meaning that you're assigning to things, like the stereotypes that you have for like certain things in your life, like having a growth mindset and better understanding your mindset in general and how it's affecting things will make a difference in your actions, your behaviors, your success in both health and fitness and otherwise.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, I wish that we could go on for another hour 15.
We could.
But no, I think that was a really great way to end the episode. And we hope that you guys enjoyed the episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit. Marissa's at Marissa Roy Fitness. Kasey, where can they find you?
Yeah, Instagram, I'm Coach Kasey Jo. It's Coach with a C and Kasey with a K.
Awesome. And we'll list that in the description along with your website and links to services and things like that. But thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.